All right, joint movements. We're going to start with the more complex ones and work our way back up the list. We're not going to go through the whole list today. So circumduction. Circumduction involves moving the distal end, the end all the way out away from the trunk, the distal end in a wide circle, and moving the base of the circle at a point. So the base of the circle is focused at an axis, moving around the center of the axis. And then the distal end is moving around in a circle. And this is my guy whose movements are always all natural. And if you want to see, the proper natural relaxed way to move, look at your dog, look at your cat, look at how an animal moves. All right, so circumduction, right? And recall that circumduction can happen at many joints in the body. It's common in the shoulder, but it can be done in the wrist. It also can be done in the head, where the vertex of the head is the stylus or the end of the pencil, and the base of the neck is the eraser, right? Circumduction, technically speaking, oh wait, let me show you the foot first. Circumduction can be performed through the hip joint, where the foot is making a wide circle. It can be performed through the ankle, right? Circumduction also could be performed through the torso or through any segment of the spine, right? All right, and then diagonal abduction, diagonal abduction. The shoulder is a pretty unique joint, so you have to think pretty carefully about how the shoulder moves. So diagonal, horizontal, right? So diagonal abduction, diagonal adduction, right? And then we already covered diagonal abduction, diagonal adduction. All right, horizontal abduction, adduction, lateral flexion, right? This trips up some people sometimes. This is lateral flexion. This also would be lateral flexion through the trunk. All right, radial and ulnar deviation. Remember, always look at the body from anatomical position. And then once you've got that clear in your mind, you can transpose to a different position if you need or you want to. So radial deviation, deviating the wrist towards the radius bone, deviating the wrist towards the ulnar bone, right? Ulnar deviation, radial deviation. It's not lateral flexion, medial flexion, or medial flexion, lateral flexion. It's not. No, it's ulnar and radial. Medial and lateral rotation happens through this bone here in this hip socket. And it looks like this: lateral rotation and then medial rotation. If I stand up straight, it looks like lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral and medial. It's also called external rotation and internal rotation. A really effective way, or a really clear way to understand which way your leg is turning is to look at the bone closest to the joint and to draw arrows on it. So in the leg, that's the femur, right? So if I rotate my knee outward, if I'm doing external rotation and I draw arrows on the thigh, the arrow should be pointing this way, externally, laterally, away from the midline. Here's my midline, here's the midline, and I'm rotating external. Now I'm rotating internally. The arrow is pointing this way. So that's internal rotation. And internal rotation is going to be, because it's named for the movement of this bone from the hip. Internal rotation is going to be internal and external rotation, whether I'm standing, whether my knee is bent, whether the leg is floating, whether the hip joint is flexed. That's external and internal. Whether the hip joint is extended, this is internal, external, external, internal, right? All the same, whether I'm laying down, whether I'm standing up, any position, as long as the movement is coming from the joint closest to the torso. So that's the hip joint and the shoulder joint, the hip joint and the shoulder joint. It's still going to be called internal or external rotation. We're looking at that bone that comes from that most proximal joint. We're looking at that bone as an axis, right? So draw a line from my shoulder joint out through my elbow. So you're seeing the humerus, the femur in the lower body, the humerus in the upper limb. And this is an axis. See the rotation of the axis, right? Just like the axis in just like any other axis, just like the axis in a car or whatever. And you draw the arrows, right? The arrows pointing outward, the humerus is rotating externally, the arrow is pointing inward, the humerus is rotating internally. Okay, I think you guys get the idea. It would be really worth it for you to just go like this whenever you can, and then change positions with your elbows and get used to saying external, internal, and then change position at the shoulder, right? And then change position at the elbow again, just to get used to saying internal, external, right? So that you understand how those are moving. One more, that's supination and pronation. Supination and pronation. Let's see, what else are we going to look at? Okay, let's do a little bit of concentric, eccentric, and then we're going to move on to anatomy and physiology. We're going to look at the cardiovascular system today, and I think the muscular system. So, concentric and eccentric. We did the forearm flexors, forearm extensors, biceps and triceps last time. So now let's do the traps and the lats. So the lats, as we saw last time, the lats are the ones that depress the shoulder blade. They pull the shoulder blades down. They also, I believe that they internally rotate. Yeah, they internally rotate the arm bone a little bit. But we're interested in the shoulder blade depression today. And the shoulder blade elevation is accomplished by the upper trapezius muscle. The upper trap has 3 sections, recall. So we're talking about the upper trap and the latissimus dorsi.